Welcome to this new video about Project Motor Racing. We're revisiting the game, because last week there was a big update released for it, Update 2.0. It was a highly anticipated update because the game is currently being salvaged. That is to say, when Project Motor Racing was released, there was a, let's say, quite considerable share. There were quite a few players who were disappointed with the game, especially for technical reasons, particularly the graphics and the game's physics. Because Project Motor Racing was marketed as the king of sims, with the most realistic driving in the world. That was almost what you would believe if you listened to the marketing. And in reality, when the game came out, even though the physics weren't bad, it was far from hardcore sim. It was more of a simcade. It's a game that's more realistic than Gran Turismo, but still for the general public, which disappointed many people as a result. This disappointment was especially felt through the game's sales, which weren't very good. As a result, a few days or weeks after its release, we learned that a significant portion of the studio had been laid off. With fewer developers, the remaining developers promised that they would release several major updates for the game to save it, to fix, let's say, its main negative points. Namely, let's say, there are maybe 4 really major ones. The vehicle handling, which isn't bad, once again, but it's not as much of a sim as what was advertised. Point number 2, graphics, which aren't ugly, but they're not the kind of graphics you would expect from a AAA game in 2026. The AI, which, it seems to me, has already been improved quite a bit. I have to admit that I haven't played enough in recent months to form an opinion on that. But the few times I played again after the first update patches, the AI was still a lot less toxic than on day one. But it's true that the AI was still particularly annoying. There's that, and also the online mode, which had issues with penalties and cheating. In short, there were really 4 main areas the devs needed to work on, and it's clear that a lot of things in these areas have been improved with this 2.0. That's what we're going to talk about today, and that's what I'll be showing you throughout this video. Well, at least if there are things you can actually see, because I'm testing the update as I speak to you, as I'm discovering it. And maybe there are some things that just won't be obvious, simply put. But there's one thing that's pretty obvious, and honestly, that's something that really feels good. Even though it's not really the core of the gameplay, all the game menus have been redone. It's true that when it was released, Project Motor Racing had an interface. How could we put it? It really looked old and felt like a real mess, didn't it? Now, everything has been reworked. All the menus have been, let's say, reorganized, but also a whole new visual menu system, so the game looks more modern and it's easier to find your way around. Well, that's true. It's nice, but it's not where we spend most of our time either. There are also some small things that have been added to the game's career mode, so I won't be able to show you everything here, because some things simply take a very long time to unlock. But, among other things, there's a new sponsorship system that has been added to the game, with new real-world sponsors. That means that up until now, if I'm not mistaken, most of the sponsors we dealt with to create our team and manage our budget were sponsors that, if I'm not mistaken, didn't actually exist in real life. And now, with this update, we're going to be working with real-world sponsors with new specific contract agreements. Afterwards, as usual, it depends on each brand and, let's say, the type of career you choose in the game. By the way, the car selection screen has also been improved. It definitely looks better now. You can see the cars more clearly, and it doesn't feel like a 90s game interface anymore. That's cool. Overall, absolutely all the menus have been redesigned, whether it's the event setup menus, even the in-race menus, even the real-time car electronic settings menus. Everything has been redone. The game wouldn't have been criticized as much precisely because of its interface choices and its overall functionality. Now, as I was saying, it's clearly not where we spend most of our time when we play. What really matters is what happens during the race. And here too, normally there are quite a few small changes. It's up to you to share your thoughts in the comments, since I know some of you play the game regularly, solo or multiplayer. So I guess those who play regularly may have noticed more of a difference between before and after this update. 2.0. What the developers explained is that some of the graphics had been reworked, both for optimization and for graphic quality. So it's true that the motor racing project, in terms of graphic quality, is still a generation behind. The games nowadays, soon 2 generations behind, with the new titles coming out in 2026 and 2027. It's true that the graphics are simplified, it's not ugly, it's just that you can see there aren't really next-gen effects, and there are still simplified graphics on certain things. So, among the things that have been improved, there's better color handling across the environment. especially for vegetation. And normally there's also better lighting management. And from what I've just seen, I'm not necessarily super convinced. Here, we're at the maximum graphics settings, and you can see that sometimes the shadows and lights still flicker. Well, it's not the end of the world either, but let's just say it's not perfect on that point yet. But normally there's better lighting, better reflections, and also some details of the outside world have been reworked, especially the vegetation and the 3D models of the grass. It's the same. It's the kind of thing that doesn't really stand out, especially when you're driving cars that go over 250 km/h. But it's true that when I see this kind of shot, I feel like I can see a difference compared to before. The 2.0. I feel like there are things that worked and things that didn't work properly with this 2.0. Especially when it comes to graphics optimization. I've seen quite a few YouTubers or game performance specialists who have done some small benchmarks. And even though overall the game runs well on my system, clearly, I can't complain. That's also because I have a powerful setup. Because apparently there are still phases where the game struggles a bit. I think it runs much better than before. And by the way, most benchmarks show that there's actually a nice little improvement in smoothness with each of the recent updates. But here, I can even see it on my FPS counter, especially on my CPU usage graph, GPU usage, and RAM usage. There are times when there are little spikes that happen, but honestly, I don't mind as long as I get smooth performance and my PC works harder behind the scenes to maintain it. Honestly, I don't really care after that. We'll have to see with maybe some more mid-range setups. Here, we're still on a setup with a 5080. And it would still be crazy if the game didn't run with a 5080. But yeah, if you've had the chance to test with a somewhat more mid-range setup and noticed any performance optimization or not, feel free to share it in the comments. The driving is still cool though. We'll talk more about it as the video goes on. And maybe we'll get into that soon actually. But even if PMR isn't the richest in the world, I still always found that the cars in this game were actually pretty satisfying to drive. And you could still get a good feel from them, including before the updates. But yeah, let's say that on the graphics side of 2.0, I'm a bit skeptical, a bit let down, because yeah, it's a bit cleaner. But honestly, I wonder if I had a mid-range setup, would it still be over 120 FPS like this one? So, that's something to check, but I won't be able to comment on that. It's really with your feedback that we'll be able to see if that's the case or not. But I don't think that's the main point of this update, so let's get into it. The main point is that most car categories are getting a new tire model, meaning new physics. In fact, the idea was really to make sure that each car and each car category has its own technical specifics. Well, this really applies to the majority of car categories. After that, there are still, I think, 3 in particular, 3 or 4, that have really had a complete rework of their physics. That would be the MX-5 trophy. We might go test that. Because the MX-5, early in my career, I drove it often while playing Project Motor Racing. So maybe I'll notice the differences better. Also the 992 trophy, the NGT, the GT, and the GTE. So there are quite a few categories where things have changed. Once again, all the categories see physics improvements with this update. But these categories in particular actually have a complete overhaul of the physics. So if you prefer, we're going to go in GT at Sebring with the Maserati here. It's true, though, that when I see this kind of cinematic, this introduction to the event, and when I see the cars up close, here, the graphics difference seems more noticeable than before, especially from the rear view during the event. It may depend on race conditions, tracks, and cars. Here, it's true that overall the game's graphics look a bit better. So now we're going in GT, which is actually one of the 4 or 5 categories in the game that normally gets a new physics update. Almost completely redesigned, actually. Well, it's not even almost. It's completely redesigned. It's literally a new tire model, so let's see how it goes with our little Maserati, which still sounds great. But as for the game sounds, even if there are a few that might be a bit off, overall the cars are pleasant to listen to and make sounds that are quite shrill, quite, how should I put it, metallic and pretty loud from one car to another, which still gives you the feeling of driving a car, you know? And that's pretty cool. Well, listen, it's true that I really need to check the lap times I did, especially on the Nürburgring, with the GT cars, and it's true that I feel like the cars are more... Well, the cars, at least the ones I'm testing here, are a bit more responsive. and a bit less understeery. Because it's true that the physics in PMR were a bit understeery, which is sometimes annoying in certain car categories, especially GT cars, for example, where you usually have a lot of downforce, and cars that normally go very, very fast through corners. It's true that here, oh yeah, that's really the case, okay. Indeed. I feel more like I'm driving a car than before the 2.0 update. The driving sensations are indeed, I think, more detailed. Oh yeah, totally. I can definitely feel it in the suspension effects and everything in the steering wheel feedback. Overall, yeah, I think that's the word. That's the right word. It's responsive, and actually, there was something I didn't really like about this game. Well, it wasn't always the case, it depended on the categories. It wasn't terrible either, but I always had a certain feeling. A bit like a boat. I mean, not exactly a boat, that's not the right word, but more like a bathtub. I mean, I had that impression in certain categories, and I think that was the case in GT. Especially with the Viper, which is still pretty heavy at the front. Here we have a completely different car, a rear-engined one. I had the impression that in corners, the cars, well, they still turned in pretty well, but as the corner went on, that's the impression I got. You know, when you take a basin, fill it with water and shake it, well, the water makes a kind of wave. Eventually, it hits the basin's edge, causing the basin to move. That's the feeling I had with the cars in the motor racing project in GT. But I don't really remember now. Maybe in NGT, and also to some extent in the endurance category, in LMDH. I felt like it was the same in corners, meaning my car would turn normally, and then suddenly it would lose grip. Like a big wave of water, as if my basin had suddenly tilted and the big wave of water hit. Yeah, it was often in the middle of the corner and it caused reactions that were a bit hard to anticipate. And that, yeah, happened a bit with all the cars in those categories here and there. Honestly, up until now, with my Maserati, I really don't feel like I'm experiencing that again, even though I'm not any faster. Granted, but still, the cars seem to me, yeah, easier to handle simply because their reaction in the corners should be more natural. Actually, we worry less about how the game will react, and more about how the car will react. And that's actually pretty cool. So yeah, I think in GT it's quite noticeable. Unfortunately, the GTO I won't be able to show you, because the GTO, if I'm not mistaken, is messed up in the game. Let's try some MX-5 gameplay to see how it goes, and also test a different car category. I was about to say there's no AI, but there actually is, and it's the same here. Actually, visually, it's better. But here it's mainly about the physics, because indeed, the MX-5 is one of those cars. Not to say anything stupid, but when you play a career in the game on a really tight budget, in beginner mode, there are only two cars you can afford. Well, two categories of cars. Either the MX-5. Oh yeah, okay, that's completely different. Alright, it's either the MX-5 or the Porsche 964. So I think a lot of people in career mode chose the MX-5, because overall, it's still an easier car to handle than the 964, which has a rear-mounted engine. Which can be a bit horrible sometimes, but that's because of its structure, the way it's built. By the way, I'm just realizing, damn, the radar, the proximity radar, it's really right in the middle of the screen. So I think there's a way to adjust that through the HUD menu, because right now, it's clearly annoying. Damn, but on the other hand, it's necessary to see, to see where the AI are. Too bad, I can't change it now since I don't remember where it is after they changed the menus. But actually, in this case, while for the GT category I had to drive a bit to notice the changes, here it's really obvious. Yeah, it's obvious, I think, but it's not obvious in a video. Because talking about physics through a video means you have to trust me. The camera may be meant to capture the car's movements, but that's not always true in this game. Yeah, it's not that the game has a bad camera, but just that, you know, when we're talking about physics. To really notice the changes, the best solution is still to test the game yourself. But clearly, yeah, the MX-5 now, it's completely different, really. Honestly, it feels a lot more like, really, the steering. It's just not the same anymore. Actually, I think that's the biggest thing. Well, it's not the most obvious thing about this car, but it's one of the most noticeable things in terms of feeling. Where now, yeah, it's closer to an MX-5 if you've ever had the chance to drive a Mazda MX-5 in real life, and then drive it in the game afterward. I think you'll still notice a clear and definite improvement in the driving, which gets closer, especially at lower speeds, to that of a real MX-5. Yeah, the steering is lighter than before, but also, there's something that's changed in the way the car slides. Well, I couldn't really explain it. Maybe it's something to do with the tires. Well, maybe. Quite simply, it's the new model with more grip. Or maybe it's a matter of the differential or the default suspension settings and the anti-roll bars, which are different at the rear. But it's a car that used to be pretty easy to start drifting with. And now it's more complicated to get it into a drift. It's like the car automatically regains grip. Grip, actually, while it's losing grip. I don't know how to explain it. It's like something is forcing it to grip. That's why I'd tend to say it might be a differential issue. After that, you can see it's harder to lose grip when accelerating again, right in the middle of the turn. I think the overall setup has been reworked for the MX-5's handling, but it's definitely more realistic. The handling, maybe it's not the most realistic MX-5 we've had in a racing game, but overall it's still better. However, one thing that's not better is the penalties. I got a 15-second penalty, so I know they're reworking the multiplayer. They emphasized, for example, that they've implemented a new anti-cheat to stop cheaters in multiplayer. But something still annoys me. Honestly, since I don't play multiplayer, I don't care. The penalty system, when it doesn't work, is annoying, and against other players, it's even worse. Here, I got a 15-second penalty even though I went off the track by myself into the fields and had already lost time. And that's something I actually saw on the game's Reddit. The penalty system is still generally pretty bad, even if it's a bit better after the update than before. And there are still times when you crash, you already lose time because you crashed. And on top of that, the game adds insult to injury and gives you penalties that are completely absurd. 15 seconds is huge. It's impossible to catch up. So, to finish, I'm going to show you a bit of gameplay with the NGT category, which is also one of the categories where the physics have been completely redone. Once again, according to what he says, we'll see how it turns out. Above all, what interests me is that apparently there's a rework of the BOP in this category, because there really was some BOP. It's, let's say, the normalization of performance, meaning there are rules. For example, so all the cars have similar power ratios, so that there isn't one that's really much better performing than the others. That's the BOP. And the BOP was actually either there was no BOP, or there was one, but it didn't work. There are clearly cars in this category that were basically unplayable in career mode. Because, well, we were getting our asses handed to us by everyone, for example. The Morgan, that's the one I picked for this little gameplay here. If you made the same crappy choice as I did in career mode, picking the Morgan to move up from an intermediate racing category to more powerful categories like NGT, you picked it because it's the cheapest one, and clearly, by far, usually. You realized back then that you couldn't do anything with that car because it was such a wreck. So, I hope that with the BOP it's less bad, and I also hope, in terms of driving, that there's been a rework because it's the same. In that category, it's still a boat. It's still terrifying to drive. We'll see how it goes. It's quite a clunker anyway, so I think maybe it's a bit better now. But actually, it's still very tricky to drive. This car, maybe it's a bit better now. So now, actually, I might not need to fight with the car as much. When I accelerate again, there's less loss of grip. And all of that might be a bit true. And honestly, I'm able to catch up with competitors. Whereas it was strictly impossible before the update with this BOP, so I think in practice it's better. On the other hand, damn, the Morgan is really terrifying to drive. It's very special. It's hard to explain, and you never feel relaxed in a corner, always fearing it might lose grip at any moment. It's kind of a mix between a super light car with some weird weight distribution and all. It's strange, but that's how it is. It's definitely more competitive than before this update, so I hope that if that's the case for this car, it's thanks to the BOP, but also thanks to the physics, which make this car less unplayable. We're actually not doing that badly, so... Well, to sum up version 2.0, what could I tell you? Honestly, it's better. Graphically, it's a bit better. I think that's true, both in terms of the quality of the graphics, which aren't bad. Frankly, nothing will ever change in Forza Motorsport. They chose to work on their own engine, which isn't a next-gen engine. They made choices like that, to work on already existing foundations for certain things. Rather than working on engines that, like Unreal Engine, can deliver really good graphics. Keep in mind, if you don't know any good racing games with Unreal Engine, it's for one simple reason. The physics in Unreal Engine are terrible. But they chose an engine that, anyway, even if it can be improved over time as time goes on. Well, it will always give graphics that are a notch above the competition, maybe even two, as the years go by, but graphically, it's still better. It still runs better. I think there are fewer stress spikes in the game, and that, overall, the smoothness must be better. In my opinion, there are fewer load spikes like we sometimes had before this update, or in the middle of a turn, we would suddenly lose 5 or 10 FPS and could end up missing the turn because of that. So, on the graphics side, it's not the most noticeable thing, but it's better on the AI side. Well, I don't know, I haven't seen if they changed any AI stuff with this update, because I just saw it now. Well, we didn't have any problems with the AI, we didn't see any code. They're strong up front, and I think they've already fixed things between this and previous updates. Most of the paths that made no sense and caused the AI to really crash, like right in the middle of a straight line, for example. So I think a lot of things have been fixed for the AI. They seem to be cleaner, even though I think it's probably not 100% finished yet, from what I've seen on Reddit. There are still times when they go back, let's say, to their old crap, doing whatever, falling back into their old habits. They tend to be more aware of you than before, but still not 100%. So, there you go. The penalty system still isn't any better. However, from what I've seen, menu, definitely better. That's obvious. The fact that there are new little podiums, we haven't seen them, but we trust them. It's still a good addition. New sponsor, as was shown earlier, that's also a good thing. And then, when it comes to the physics, honestly, the work is pretty obvious this time. And it's true that it's a shame the game didn't come out in this state. Honestly, I think they've fixed the main driving issues, but some things still need fine-tuning. Probably some car models in certain categories that might have worse physics than others, or things that need to be reworked. But overall, well, we don't have problems in Hypercar anymore. That was already true with the last update. I just haven't retested it yet. The GT we tested before was pretty cool. Overall, the car is much more responsive, with the same feel as the NX5. With more responsive steering, but also more planted to the ground. And here, it's the same with the NGT we're testing now. Well, it's kind of the same, actually, also more responsive. The car is better planted to the ground, a bit more predictable and fewer weird reactions. Strange, right? And then, on top of that, with the BOP, it means we can pretty much keep up with the opponents. Even with the old banger, the real clunker, the Morgane. Sorry, so yeah, I think it's a good update. That's not it. The problem is, well, I think there's still a long way to go before the game is what was promised. And it's not certain that making these updates will really bring in new players. I think that's the goal here, to convince players who weren't convinced to buy the game to finally buy it, to make the game profitable, and guaranteeing these updates and support over the next few years. I don't know if version 2.0 will be enough for that. Like, if the game had been released like this, I think most of the criticism wouldn't have happened. Hardcore players' criticism would have been milder, the game would have better Steam ratings, and it wouldn't have been review bombed. Is it possible to make up for that with updates like this, even if the updates are good? Isn't it a bit too late? Well, that's for you to say in the comments. Anyway, the game, in terms of player numbers, is relatively stable on Steam. There was a peak in the last few days with the arrival of 2.0, but also because the game for a while, and actually, it's still the case today, if you happen to see this video before midnight, the game is currently free to play. So, if you haven't bought it, you can try it for free on Steam and see if you like it or not, before maybe buying it later to keep playing. But actually, besides that, it's true that the game has a pretty stable player base. Apparently there aren't any big spikes or big drops. It rises slightly with updates, drops a few days later, then stabilizes at the same level. So, well, there's still hope for the motor racing project. But yeah, there's still work to do, probably for it to really be on the same level, like the other benchmark titles in the genre, basically. So, yeah, it's good, but there's still work to do. I think that wraps up this video nicely. I hope you found it interesting. Oh, I was looking at OBS. I hope you found this video interesting and that it allowed you to revisit some PMR gameplay in better conditions. If you enjoyed the video, feel free to show it by leaving a like and by subscribing. Don't hesitate to leave your feedback on the updates in the comments. I'd like to remind you that the game is cheaper. My Instagaming link will be under this video, in a pinned comment. Don't hesitate to check it out for a lower price, especially if this update convinced you. I often live stream there, discussing games, cars, and more. Please follow me and drop a Prime sub. It means a lot. See you tomorrow with a new video. Ciao!